That's what I do when I'm scared, just lean back. Ah! Yeah, exactly. Hey everybody, I'm Mike Levy and welcome back to another field test video. This time we have Ibis's 4th generation Mojo. Now that name has been in Ibis's catalog since way back in 1994 when it was actually a hardtail. But this new version is a 130mm travel trail bike with 140mm fork and 27.5-inch wheels. Now the 4th generation frame is entirely new and it features updated geometry, a metric shock, and internal cable routing. It's an all-new frame, but it's still using DW Link suspension, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. DW Link is a dual link design that uses a relatively high amount of anti-squat and is shocked with a light compression tune. And speaking of tunes, there's something else interesting about this bike. It's running something that Ibis calls traction tune. And not only is the compression tune light, because the DW Link doesn't need it, the rebound tune is light as well, with the thinking there that it lets the rear wheel move up and out of the way quickly because of that light compression tune, but also return quickly and stay in contact with the ground thanks to the light rebound tune. Ibis says that it provides more traction, hence the name traction tune. Now that lower link, it's running on bushings still that come with a lifetime warranty, and you'll also find bearings instead of bushings up in the upper link. Okay, let's move on to the rest of the frame, and Ibis says that it has an all-new carbon layup that improves the way that it feels on the trail. Now, gram counters are going to be happy to hear that the frame is actually about half a pound lighter than an HD5 frame. There's frame protection everywhere, including the bottom of the down tube, on top of the chainstay where we expect to see it, and there's also a neat little fender above the lower link. The idea there is that it's going to keep rocks and stuff from getting jammed into that link as the suspension goes through its travel. Now there's also room for a regular size water bottle inside the front triangle, but to do that, Ibis has had to run an inline Fox shock as opposed to one with a piggyback. Over the years, we've seen companies come up with all sorts of different ways to carry stuff on their bikes. Trek and Specialized have holes in their down tubes. Other companies are doing other things. Ibis, well, they've made a bag that slots right into their front triangle. It's zippered on one side. It's big enough to hold a tube, pump, a donut, whatever you want. It's actually not even bolted or strapped to the frame. It's a spring-loaded fit. It's pretty neat, pretty convenient. Ibis has done pretty well with the rest of the trail bike checklist. That includes a threaded bottom bracket, a removable set of ISCG chain guide tabs, pass-through cable routing as well, so you can just push it right through and it just magically comes out the other end without you having to scream at it, and as well as a short seat tube so you could run a longer travel dropper post. Okay, let's move on and talk about geometry now. Seat angle, 76.6 degrees. Head tube angle, 65.4 degrees. That's almost 2 degrees slacker than the previous version. Now going right along with those numbers is the bike's reach, which is 485 millimeters for a large. Again, that's the longest Mojo that Ibis has ever done. The 27.5-inch wheels allow them to use short 425mm chainstays, so that's a pretty short rear end. And the bikes are all using short 37mm offset forks as well. One last thing to mention, all of these field test trail bikes feature adjustable geometry, except for the Ibis. Now some of those bikes, the geometry is only adjustable by about this much. You know, you're changing the bottom bracket height by 4mm and the head angle by 1/3 of a degree. Ibis, well, you're gonna ride it exactly how it comes. No adjustments whatsoever, and I'm a fan of that simplicity. Okay, let's look at some more numbers. There are 5 different complete Mojo bikes to pick from, built with either Shimano or SRAM parts. You could also get a frame and shock combo for $3,000 American. Complete bikes start at $4,500 American, and that gets you a Dior drivetrain. And if you want something really fancy, the other end of the spectrum comes with an Axis drivetrain, $10,700. This is the SLX model that retails for $5,400, but I've got a couple upgraded parts on here, including Ibis's carbon wheel set and their carbon handlebar that bumps that up to $6,267 American. And on the scale, it all adds up to 28 pounds and 9 ounces. So those are all the details and all the numbers on the new Mojo. Up next, let's talk about how this trail bike rides. Let's cover setup first, and this is the field test, so that means control tires, and it's the same as the other trail bikes. A dissector on the back and a Minion DHF up front. Pressures 21 and 23 PSI. Now as far as suspension setup goes, I went for manufacturer's suggested setting in the back, and that gave me between 25 and 30% sag. All right, let's talk about climbing now, and Ibis has long been known for bikes that have been pretty fast and efficient feeling on those climbs. But this new Mojo, well, it's slacker and longer than ever. So does it feel like a worse climber? Well, actually, Ibis has done a pretty impressive job of combining more capability on the downs without losing any of that Ibisness on the up. Let's talk about pedaling first. The bike feels extremely quick, and it really rewards you for your efforts that you put in. At no point did I feel like I needed to reach down and flip that switch. Even out of the saddle efforts didn't really get the bike moving all that much. If you plan on doing the odd cross-country race on your Mojo, yeah, you might want to reach down and flip that switch. But for day-to-day trail riding, I don't think you're ever gonna need to do that. Let's talk about some comparisons on the climbs now, and the first bike I want to mention is that giant Trans X with the live valve suspension. Now that basically, it turns the bike into a rocket ship, and while the Ibis is quick, it wasn't as quick as the Giant on our timed climb. We're gonna talk about those times in a minute. But when traction is questionable, well, I think the Ibis has got the advantage over the Giant. Especially if it's wet and the ground is loose, the Ibis seems to keep rolling even with these 27.5-inch wheels. In those slow speed technical sections, it's this Mojo and it's the Giant that really come out ahead. Those other bikes like the P-Train and the Salsa, they feel substantially bigger. Even the Stumpy feels bigger than this bike, which is worth noting. Now all of the bikes are pretty decent technical climbers, but I'm definitely gonna give the nod to the Ibis Mojo on that front. We're gonna talk about handling first. And well, bottom line, this is easily the most capable Mojo that they've ever made. But the truth is that everybody else's trail bikes have moved on as well. They're also longer and slacker and even more capable. And at the end of the day, where this bike is positioned, it's kind of in the same place as that classic trail bike that's meant for all sorts of terrain instead of being capable on just the most challenging terrain. The Mojo is a bike that dances easily, and what I mean by that is that it leans on its quick handling. When you're coming up to a rough, tricky, or challenging section on the Salsa or the P-Train, you can really lean on those bikes, get over the front end, and just charge right through them. Whereas on the Mojo, you're better off to dip and dive through that stuff. So if you're an active rider that reads the trail and responds to it, the Mojo might be a bike for you. Whereas if you're the kind of rider that takes the straightest, fastest line all the time, then a bike like the Salsa or the P-Train is gonna be more your speed, quite literally. So the bottom line is that, well, Ibis calls this thing an all-mountain play bike, and I really don't want to use those words. I sort of have to agree with them. The shorter rear end, because of the smaller wheel and the slightly steeper head angle, they make for a bike that is easier to toss around and slightly quicker handling than even the Stumpy and the Giant Trans X. All right, let's move on to something a little less subjective, the timing. Now we timed both the climb and the descent. We're gonna talk about the climb first. It came second, 19 seconds behind the Giant with that live valve suspension that turned that bike into a rocket ship, so I'm pretty impressed. Now that climb was a mix of smooth single track at the bottom before you rode into some steep, tricky, rooty, and rocky stuff that really tested the bike's technical abilities. Our descent trail was a good mix of technical challenges for these trail bikes with a healthy dose of traversing that really tested the bike's efficiency and low speed handling. Not only that, there were a couple steep sections there that really gave us a feel for this new geometry that all the trail bikes have. And in that setting, the Mojo came fourth out of 5 bikes. Now the fastest bike was the Acto 5 P-Train at 4:27. The Mojo's time, 4 minutes and 51. Moving on to the build, let's talk about the components that impressed me first. And the SLX drivetrain with that Hyperglide Plus design, shifting under power, I mean, I don't know how many times I could say this, it is just damn impressive. When you're going up a steep climb and you need to grab an easier gear at the worst possible moment, you used to have to ease up a little bit, yeah, like that. This bike, no, you just keep pedaling, it doesn't matter. This Hyperglide Plus stuff has been really impressive. So one more note on the Shimano drivetrain before we move on is that there's no real performance difference between this SLX drivetrain and an XT drivetrain that we're seeing everywhere. And I want to give Ibis some kudos for speccing an SLX bike and giving riders the opportunity to upgrade to, well, the higher end carbon wheels that I'm going to talk about next. Ibis debuted carbon wheels many years ago, and I had those original super wide wheels. I used them for, I think, 4 years, and then I gave them to a buddy. He's still using the damn things. I had zero trouble with the latest version on this bike as well. They didn't give me a single hiccup. I've inspected them for cracks or even gouges that might look kind of scary. Not a single one. Let's talk about suspension next, and Ibis has taken a more traditional trail bike approach on that front. And what it means is they've spec'd a Fox fork with a Fit 4 damper cartridge with the pedal assist switch, as opposed to some of the other bikes have the higher performing Grip 2 damper that gives you a bit of an edge when it gets really rough and fast. When it does get rough and fast, there is a difference in performance. The front end has a little bit less traction and requires a little bit more air to keep the fork higher up in its travel than the bikes with the Grip 2 damper in their forks. We also have to talk about Ibis's traction tune before we move on, and that is that lightly damped rear shock. It has a light rebound tune and a very light compression tune, and that creates a fast rebounding bike, and Ibis recommends running basically no rebound damping for the shock. Now, when this first came out, both myself and Casimir tried it. Casimir wasn't a fan, and now that I've ridden it again on this latest Mojo, I'm still not a fan. I don't like the way that it creates an unpredictable and slightly uncontrolled ride. I just didn't have much confidence in what the bike was going to do. Thankfully, I could turn that rebound adjuster, which is exactly what I did, and slowed it down and made it more traditional, and I prefer my rebound slightly slower, to be honest. And the bike rides way better in my mind. Okay, let's talk about some components that didn't impress me. I'm gonna start at the back of the bike with the Ibis branded rear hub. The hub's axle, not the through axle, actually unthreaded itself so much that I thought the hub axle was broken. It turns out that it wasn't, but if you have an Ibis branded hub on the back of your Mojo, you definitely wanna keep an eye on it. The other thing I'm gonna moan about is that SLX rear brake. It's not the fact that they're only 2-piston. I think this bike is properly spec'd and the brakes have plenty of power. It has a migrating bite point. Now we've seen this loads from Shimano recently and it's getting really annoying, and bleeding doesn't fix it. They're gonna have to sort it out. Let's talk about pros and cons first, and the biggest one for me is how well-rounded the Mojo is. Yeah, it's not great at this super aggressive stuff, but pretty much everywhere else, this is the classic capable trail bike. A big reason for that is how fast and efficient the bike is, and that's the next big upside to me. This isn't a bike that I ever felt like I needed to reach down and flip that pro pedal switch. Lastly, it's a new trail bike on 27.5-inch wheels, and that's pretty rare these days, isn't it? Let's move on to the cons, and while Ibis has created a very well-rounded bike, it's still not going to be the Descender's choice, regardless of that new slack and long geometry. Like I've said over and over again, it's more focused on all-around riding, and when it gets really rough and tricky, it can't match some of the other bikes, including the Specialized Stump Jumper, which is probably its most direct competitor. All right, let's wrap up the Mojo. Trail bikes are becoming incredibly capable these days, with some of them approaching what was used on the EWS circuit only a few short years ago. That increased descending ability has come at a cost though, with some of these bigger feeling bikes being far less well-rounded and therefore suiting less riders and less terrain than a trail bike ever should. But the new Mojo, it doesn't fall into that trap. It uses its updated geometry for increased capability on the downs without losing those trail bike vibes everywhere else. That's it for Ibis's 4th generation Mojo. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any field test video reviews or roundtable discussions.